Vito Genovese poisoned Bumpy's glass. Bumpy pulled out a razor and made Genovese drink it himself. The glass is raised in a crowded room where respect is currency. An insult moves quietly through the air. Bumpy Johnson doesn't react. He listens, and the room starts holding its breath. The room is already loud before Bumpy Johnson walks in. Not with voices, with awareness. Chairs straighten. Conversations lower by half a degree. Not enough to look obvious, just enough to register. Harlem knows how to make space without announcing it. Bumpy doesn't rush. He never does. His pace is steady, unbothered, almost inconvenient to anyone hoping for a reaction. A dark suit, clean lines, white shirt pressed sharp enough to cut light. His face carries no intention beyond being present. That's the part people misunderstand. They think presence is passive. It isn't. It's control before words. The table is already set. Glasses lined up. Bottles opened. Hospitality arranged like a performance. Polite. Respectful on the surface. Too careful to be casual. Bumpy notices that immediately. He takes his seat without ceremony. Doesn't look around to see who's watching. Doesn't acknowledge the shift he caused just by sitting down. His hands rest near the table. Still, unarmed, calm. Someone pours the drink. A clean pool. No spill. No tremor. That's important. Tremors mean fear. Fear changes rules. The glass slides across the table toward Bumpy. No one speaks. In Harlem, silence is never empty. It's loaded. It carries weight the way a drawn blade does. Quiet, sharp, waiting. Bumpy looks at the glass. Just long enough. Not suspicion. Recognition. This isn't generosity. It's positioning. Around him, men pretend not to watch. Their eyes stay on cigarettes, on walls, on nothing at all. But their bodies lean just slightly toward the center, toward the moment. Because everyone knows what this is. It's an insult wrapped in manners. A challenge disguised as courtesy. If Bumpy drinks without pause, he accepts more than the glass. If he refuses, he turns the room into a courtroom. So he does neither. He listens to the room, to the breath patterns, to the confidence that doesn't belong here. Somewhere across the table, the intention sits comfortably, too comfortably, the kind of comfort that assumes protection, the kind that mistakes distance for safety. Bumpy lifts the glass, slowly, not to drink, just enough for the light to catch it. The movement alone tightens the air. A few men stop breathing without realizing it. Someone shifts in their seat and regrets the sound it makes. Bumpy doesn't look at anyone yet. He brings the glass close. Not to his lips. Close enough to acknowledge it. To accept the offering without accepting the meaning behind it. That's the line. And everyone feels it. This is no longer about a drink. It's about whether disrespect can sit at Bumpy Johnson's table and remain standing afterward. Bumpy finally looks up. His eyes don't harden. They don't soften either. They settle, like a judge who already knows the verdict, but allows the moment to finish speaking. No one interrupts him. No one would dare, because they all understand something now. The insult has been delivered. Quietly, cleanly, and Bumpy Johnson hasn't responded yet, which means the room doesn't belong to anyone else anymore. Not yet, and not for long. Harlem moves around Bumpy Johnson the way water flows around stone. Unseen, inevitable, shaping everything without a sound. Streets, corners, small shops, they all bend to an unspoken rule. People don't talk about it. They just know. Businesses leave doors open a little wider when his men walk by. Barbers nod slightly too long. Patrons shift subtly in booths. Conversation drops just a notch in every cafe, every diner. Respect isn't asked for. It's understood, and it's paid in silence. Bumpy sits in his club, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and quiet attention. His face is unreadable. Even those closest to him can't guess what he's thinking. Not really. It's part of the architecture, an invisible blueprint of power drawn from restraint, from calm dominance, from knowing that a moment of patience is worth more than any outburst of violence. A few men gather near the windows, looking out. Their coats hang just so, fedoras tipped against the dull light, filtering through rain-specked glass. They're armed, Yes, but the weapons are extensions of principle, not panic. The weight of the brass, the cold of the steel, they remind everyone present that choices have consequences. That power doesn't shout, it waits. Inside, the club is alive without noise. A record spins somewhere, muffled jazz that doesn't compete with attention. Waiters move with care, carrying trays like diplomats crossing a battlefield. Even the bottles on the shelves seem to understand a hierarchy. Not a single gesture is wasted. Powell enters. Fear threads through him. A tightrope he can't let others see unravel. But the room doesn't move for him. It doesn't react. It's not a trap. It's an environment conditioned to recognize authority. Powell is aware of the weight, the subtle pressure that builds from Bumpy's restraint. He feels it in the angle of a glance, the set of shoulder, the quiet command in the space itself. Conversations continue at low hums, laughter half muted, chairs scraping lightly. And yet, every person here knows who decides. The men of Harlem know it because Bumpy has taught them without raising his voice, without demanding loyalty in words. It is assumed, earned, unquestionable. A hand gestures slightly, just a fraction, toward a table. Someone nods. Bumpy notices, of course, but doesn't acknowledge. He doesn't need to. The room responds anyway. Decisions are made in whispers, in glances, in the way a man simply exists in the space and others align around him. Outside, the streets carry the lesson. Delivery boys, shopkeepers, street corner hangers, they've all seen it before. The club door opens, and Harlem breathes in recognition. They sense the protection that comes not from yelling or threat, but from certainty. Bumpy leans back. His eyes scan the room with calm precision. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is forced. Power is not a performance. It's an inheritance of silence, a promise understood without being spoken. Every man present leaves the room knowing who holds the scale, who can tilt the world without spilling a drop. Because in Harlem, authority isn't displayed. It's absorbed, and Bumpy Johnson is its center. Powell steps through the doorway like a man carrying the weight of storm. Every muscle taut, jaw set, eyes sharp, but he does not yell, he does not announce. His anger is quiet, his fear restrained, but the tension radiates through the club's thick air. The room seems to contract around him, not in welcome, not in challenge. It simply waits. Waits for the man who always decides. The patrons glance briefly, then return to their drinks, their smoke, their quiet conversation. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of a fedora, the shift of a chair, acknowledge Bumpy's presence, not Powell's. Powell's eyes flick to the far corner. There, Bumpy sits behind a low table, a cigarette balanced between slender fingers. His expression is calm, unshaken. No words, no gestures, no dramatics. Just presence. The kind of presence that bends men to understanding without raising a voice. The air smells of tobacco, liquor, and something heavier, anticipation. Powell knows he has crossed the line, and yet he must continue. Step by step, he moves deeper into the room. The subtle creak of polished wood underfoot sounds loud in the quiet. A waiter freezes mid-step, tray suspended like a tableau. The faint hum of jazz feels like a whisper compared to the tension. Powell's hand brushes against his coat pocket. A small movement. Nothing more. Bumpy's eyes follow, but not with hostility. Just measurement. Observation. Every second stretches, elongated by restraint, by the understanding that power does not need display. It simply exists. Men shift slightly, just enough to mark boundaries. Their guns hang low, holstered or laid on tables, symbols of authority waiting to be invoked but never rushed. They understand the rules. Silence is the loudest command. A pause and Powell's breath catches. He wants to speak, to make a claim, to assert himself, but the room doesn't allow it. Not through force, not through threat. The weight of the man in the chair, the calm in his posture, the certainty in his gaze, makes any declaration seem unnecessary, even foolish. He stops. His pulse quickens. The lesson is clear. Here, In this room, actions are measured, words are rare, and consequences are inevitable. Powell realizes the club is a court, and Bumpy Johnson is the judge who doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, but whose decisions are absolute. And in that silence, Powell feels the full extent of the man he has walked to confront. The lion does not roar. He waits. The club is alive with quiet power. 40 men fill the room, but it does not feel crowded. It feels deliberate. Each body, each stance, each subtle glance communicates loyalty, understanding, and restraint. No voices rise. No threats cut the air. Bumpy sits at the head of a long wooden table, his hands folded over the polished surface. His eyes sweep the room, calm but precise, measuring who is present, who is ready, and who still hesitates. Powell stands near the entrance, tension coiled tight in his shoulders. He expected noise, an argument, maybe even violence. Instead, the room hums with quiet authority. A man shifts his chair slightly. Another adjusts his tie. Every action is minimal, intentional. They're all armed, yes, guns holstered, knives sheathed, but they're instruments of order, not chaos. Bumpy speaks only once, and it is enough. A single sentence, measured, deliberate, and almost too quiet to hear. Heads nod subtly. Powell feels the weight of the words even before fully processing them. He understands that commands are not always shouted. Sometimes they are implied, absorbed through silence and respect. Outside the windows, the city continues, unaware of the subtle orchestration within. Smoke curls from ashtrays, dim light flickers against wooden panels, and a faint clink of glasses punctuates the room like punctuation marks in a silent script. Bumpy's presence dominates every corner, every table, every chair. He does not raise a voice, yet no one dares to move without acknowledgement of his authority. Powell's eyes trace the men, 40 strong, disciplined, attentive. Each one is a reflection of Bumpy's control, trained in restraint, patience, and loyalty. Not one acts without thought. Not one challenges the unspoken law. Their movements are subtle, coordinated through understanding rather than orders. Time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. Powell realizes the true power of the room. It is not in the guns, not in the potential violence, but in the absolute certainty of obedience and respect. Every man knows what is expected without a single word being spoken. Finally, as if on cue, the men begin to leave. Step by step, silently, they exit into the Harlem night. Powell watches them go, armed yet disciplined, aware yet calm. Each departure reinforces the lesson. Authority is felt, not shouted. Control is shown, not demanded. Bumpy remains seated, hands folded, eyes steady. The club exhales and Powell understands. The room has been ruled without spectacle, without force, without unnecessary bloodshed. Power, here, moves quietly, but it moves with absolute certainty. The threat had arrived quietly, carried in whispers and glances, but it dissolved before it ever reached its peak. Bumpy's hands rested on the polished bar, still tender from minor burns, a mark of previous encounters, a reminder that restraint often leaves scars. Yet the pain was irrelevant. Power, he knew, was never in the immediate reaction. It lived in patience, in silence, in timing. Powell watches from the corner, body tense, expecting interruption. But nothing comes. Not a shout, not a hand raised, not a single overt command. Bumpy moves slowly to the center of the room, every step deliberate. His eyes sweep the men gathered. 100 small judgments, recorded and measured in fractions of a second. The room feels taut, like a string pulled tight, vibrating with controlled energy. A man shifts nervously, glancing at his companion. Another fidgets with the cuff of his sleeve. Bumpy stops, tilts his head slightly, and the movement halts. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. In the room, silence is louder than any gunshot. Powell feels it press against him, an invisible weight, an authority that needs no demonstration. The men leave one by one, not in chaos but in quiet obedience. Each departure is measured, each glance backward a confirmation of understanding. Weapons remain holstered. No orders are spoken. The lesson is embedded, etched into memory. Respect is not demanded by fear alone. It is carved through demonstration of control. Outside, the streets of Harlem hum with life, unaware of the invisible hand that has just orchestrated absolute dominance. Inside, Bumpy's presence lingers, unshaken and unspoken, a quiet force that bends the room without raising a voice. Powell feels the magnitude of what has transpired. Violence, the city believes, is loud and dramatic. But true power, he now realizes, is silent. It is patience. It is certainty. It is inevitability. The room exhales as the final man exits. Bumpy remains seated, hands resting lightly, eyes calm and steady. No cheers. No applause. Just the quiet aftermath of authority that never needed a shout, because everyone already knew who held the room. Control without blood had been asserted. And in that quiet dominance, the lesson is complete. Actions unperformed, threats unexecuted, can carry more weight than any display of violence. Long after the doors of the club closed, long after the men had dispersed into the night, the lesson endured. Harlem remembered, though no one spoke it aloud, that protection was not about noise, not about spectacle, not about the flash of a gun or the snap of a fist. It was about certainty. It was about presence. And in the shadowed corners of the streets, in the doorways of the small shops and churches, that presence was known. The church, once threatened, still stood, its windows intact, its doors unbroken. The congregation moved through its halls with a quiet reverence, unaware of how close destruction had loomed, but the elders whispered of Bumpy Johnson, of the calm that preceded the storm. Children playing on the stoops sensed the weight in the adults' gazes, the unspoken knowledge that there were men in the city whose authority could shape the night without firing a shot. On the streets, business owners locked up as usual, their steps steady, their voices subdued. Yet in their measured nods and in the wary glance given to strangers, there was a common understanding. Some rules are carved in silence. Some protections are granted by loyalty, and some legacies endure because they are quiet yet absolute. Bumpy's name was not shouted from rooftops, but it lingered in the air. It carried respect, it carried caution, it carried inevitability. In Harlem, stories began to circulate, not of violence, but of mastery. Of a man who, when threatened, did not erupt, did not overreact, did not give the enemy what they expected. Instead, he turned a moment that could have ended in blood into a lesson in restraint and power. Powell spoke in hushed tones about it, repeating the sequence of calm, measured movements that left 40 men armed but disciplined, that left threats unfulfilled yet permanently acknowledged. Even weeks later, when new faces arrived on the avenues, when outsiders whispered of trouble or injustice, the word traveled quietly. The city remembered who controlled the night. They remembered that authority is not proven by spectacle, but by the invisible mark it leaves on every observer. Bumpy's legacy, forged in patience and unspoken dominance, expanded without a fight, without a shout, without a single public eruption. And so Harlem moved forward under the shadow of certainty. Buildings remained untouched, streets remained orderly, and the whispers of respect continued to weave through the neighborhoods. In every glance exchanged, every nod given, every hesitant step, the city held its knowledge. Power, true power, is calm. It endures. It shapes memory, and it leaves a legacy longer than fear ever could.